And it's a very, very good morning. Further ado, let's go to you, Paul Dalligan. Goodness me. AFLW, 6-team season, just about to start today. You must be all over it.
Looking forward to it. The women's season, it's starting right as I speak, actually, so it could be a battle as to whether I'm more compelling than the actual game itself. But it is good to see the fourth season of Women's Rugby League. It's got off the ground and running. The Broncos have won all three, but I'll get to it shortly. I don't think they'll win a fourth. There's 6 teams now. We've got the 3 foundation teams, Roosters, Broncos and Dragons. The Warriors are gone, I think maybe because of the COVID pandemic, just a little bit too difficult for them. As we know on the men's side, the Warriors have had to base themselves in Australia now for a few years, or a couple of years. So what is great is we've got 3 fantastic rugby league areas bringing a women's team in. We've got the Eels, we've got the Knights and the Titans arriving to make it a gang of 6. The obvious queries are where of last year's 2 grand finalist teams, being the Rabbitohs and the Panthers. The Panthers have a better nursery than Jamie Jury, so I don't know why they haven't managed to muster up a women's team. Professor, that's just a query for them, I guess, but it would be great to see them represented. If this season goes well, which I'm sure it will, over a 6-week period, I'm sure the other clubs will be scrambling to get a team in. What interests me, and the bookies, as we know, don't give away free money, the longest odds team is the Knights. So I don't know the AFL women's odds pre-season, but I'm sure there were teams that were a little bit longer than $11 in the market. So I don't think there's people getting their super out to bet on this, and they're probably not overly cautious with their pricing. But what it shows is that with the top team at $2.50, the Broncos, who won the last 3, and the last ranked team, the Knights, at $11, I think it shows we're up for a pretty close competition, Professor.
Now, you mentioned the New Zealand team, Paul. I believe that 8 of those players are involved with the Knights.
Yeah, and quite a few have gone to the Titans. I'll cut ahead of you there. I want to tip the first Gold Coast team to have any success, and I think the Titans might even win it all at $8, if you don't mind. So that would be great to see a team. And wouldn't it be great for the area of the Gold Coast, given the Suns? I saw an article about the Gold Coast Suns the other day announcing, did people even know there's a team there? That's how much buzz they've generated. It would be great to see the NRL women's Gold Coast team match the rise of the men's team and just go pretty well. There's a very fine story, though, in yesterday's Australian about a player, and I'll call her out early, that I think she might win the medal for the best player in the competition. It's called the Dalligan Women's Medal. I think they should have a women's name on the medal for best player, but it is called the Dalligan Women's Medal. Jessica Surgis, Professor, great story. At age 5, she thrashed the boys, but got to an age where you couldn't play mixed rugby league anymore. So she went out, and I think she tried more sports than Bruce McAvaney, because she's gone through OzTag, netball, AFL women's, and just couldn't find the competitiveness and the combative nature that she wanted in rugby league, and she found it. And she played at the Dragons. She made it Origin. She made best player in the game. But she's now back to the Roosters, which is her home area. And I think she's going to be an absolute superstar. There's sponsors clamoring all over themselves to get her name on their product. She's already part of the Channel 9 coverage, and she'll be on screen today, Professor, if you've got a spare afternoon, at 1:50, and playing for the Roosters up against the Broncos. They're $2.75, the Roosters, and I think, can I tag a new phrase for the show? Don't be a mess. Back Jess. And she's going to be $3.75 to cross over the white line. Not Dane Swan style either. Just to score a try there, Jessica Surgis today, $3.75. So get a little bit on that, along with some of the Gildings tips later on. We've got the Dragons and Titans as we speak, and I think the Titans, as I said, I think they'll account for the Dragons. I think they're in it for a big year. What I love about this season, it's only 6 games. Now, that might not seem many, but I think it's almost like the NFL that we both love. Because there's only a 16-game season, every game means something, and you can't get teams getting too far ahead of the pack, and you can't really get basket cases when it's such a condensed season. And that might be why the the bookies' odds for the longest shot, the Knights are $11. Newcastle is such a great rugby league area. I'd love to see them do well. The Broncos, of course, are not having much success with their men's team, but hopefully that might change. I'm just looking forward to a 6-game season where every game will mean something. The Knights, you were right, they've got more Kiwis than you'd see at a Dave Dobbin concert. They've dragged a lot across from the Warriors team, so they're full of Kiwis, the Knights. But we'll see how they go. They're ranked last in the rankings, so we will see. But looking forward to it. Jessica Sturgis, the name, Professor. You heard it here first, or perhaps you read it in the Australian yesterday.
Well, there was discussion during the week about having a women's medal called the Maggie M. I don't know if you saw that article about a lady called Maggie Maloney. I was amazed by this. Rugby league women started in 1921. There was actually a competition, and she was the main push behind the league at the time. And the Sydney Morning Herald thinks that that's a great.
There she is.
There she is. Yeah. Well, isn't that just an obvious?
And it did help her that she had a haircut, which you couldn't really tell her from the boys. So she was running around. But you would have read, I knew you would have read this. She ran around in front of 30,000 people and scored 4 tries and was on the front page of the newspaper. And she was being compared to Dally M at the time. And it would be a great, Francesca, the mother of my kids, her surname's Maloney. It's quite an unusual surname. So it might be a distant Irish relative there in my kids. So that would be a nice touch. But yeah, she's a superstar, and she made the front page of the main newspaper in Sydney in the 1920s, which I doubt would happen from a female sports star of any kind, unless it was Olympics, of course.
And Paul, of course, there'll be the inevitable comparison to the AFLW in the so you've only got 6 teams, we've got 18. But I, as we've spoken before, I can see the AFLW ending in tears. And it sounds to me that the NRL is sort of a slow burn for the women's competition, which is what I actually think the women's competition should have done. How do you see it growing from here?
Well, they might have laughed that there was only 4 teams to start with. People might have, whereas the AFL goes long and hopes it works. Here's looking at you, GWS and the Suns. Here, we're only adding teams if it's known that they're going to succeed, and they'll only add cautiously, and they will only add the teams that they know will work. And as I said to you, those 3 areas where they've added are rugby league heartland. The Eels, the Knights, well, Gold Coast is anyone's to own. I think they're very smart about this, about who they've added. And these 6 teams, they've all got their own story. They're not just added like a white elephant like GWS or the Suns, forgive me, but they're actually going to work. And they'll only add teams. And I can just see Penrith has 3 million people to call on in that area, outside of the Eels outside of even the Eels catchment area. The Panthers would have a lot of players from Maori background and Pacific Island background who I'm wondering why the Panthers don't have a team, but when they arrive, they'll be something.
Paul,
so it's a 6-game season. I can't say it enough. Each game will mean something. Whereas I think the problem is you're already getting in the AFL women's, you're getting basket cases. There's too many games, and there's not that compression that you need to make things interesting.
Paul, the matches, there's 3 of them today, a triple header, being played at Newcastle.
Yeah, we've got the Roosters. So remember our phrase there, don't be a mess back, Jess. That's on at 1:50 today. We've already got the Titans underway, Dragons at 0-0 here. And then we've got the Knights, decent odds against the Eels. So that'll be interesting to see. I think the Roosters might win at odds today at 1:50 p.m. And then you've got later on today, you could have a marathon rugby league if you wanted, Professor. The Knights, I don't think yet will be gelling enough to beat the Eels, who have got a pretty solid squad. And I think the Eels should win that.
Paul, unlike in the AFLW, the NRL have taken some concentration into factoring in that the men have to play as well. I see that the only men's game slated for today is Storm and the Knights at 5:45 once the women have finished. Unfortunately, the AFL don't seem to see it the same way.
No, it's great. And you could actually have there'd be possibly a lot of unhappy wives. You could have a whole afternoon of 3 women's games and then the men, and it said it's time for bed almost, you know. So you could almost have an NRL marathon, but they're not clashing, and I love that. I really enjoy that. And as the season builds up and the finals, they'll be played in conjunction and supporting the men's game alongside the men's game, not playing second fiddle, but all on a platter, if you call it that, of rugby league, which I love.
All right, so Paul, you've tipped Jess the Mess to score a try.
Don't call her that. Come on, unless she cops one in the face from a ginormous Maori, an elbow or something. I hope she doesn't look like a mess. She's quite sharp on the eye, Jess, as well, which might help the sponsorship. Her skills, though, are out of this world, and she's one to watch. And I'll be watching at 150, and not just with a financial investment. I'm invested in her as a player, and I think she'll be the superstar the game will need to take it to new levels. So she's on this afternoon, 150.
So your selections today are the Roosters to beat the Broncos, correct?
Yes, which is an outside tip. It'll be very close, but I think our girl Jess, we'll have to try and get her on the show, will score. And then the Knights, I don't think meshing everyone together, like getting everyone into a haka at the Knights there. They'll have to see if they can get the chemistry straight away, because they used to play for the Warriors, most of them. The Eels will be too strong this afternoon.
Okay. And you're thinking Gold Coast will beat St George?
Yes, I've tipped that. It's underway now, so it's looking like a decent game.
All right. So now, ladder finish 6-1. Who's going to finish bottom in the A? I want your long-term predictions.
Oh, well, I've got the Knights. I'll have to agree with the bookies coming last. I've got the Titans at first, and then I think our girl Jess will get the Roosters into second. Broncos third. Eels fourth. Dragons fifth, which our regular listener Kevin Yap won't like, but he would have enjoyed the Charity Shield if you want me to touch on that.
Oh, we'll come to that. We'll come to that very shortly, Paul. Judge, wanted to have a look at the different ways that the NRL and the AFL are handling their women's competitions. Let's start with the most obvious. The NRL has sought to more align its season with the women's season. Women starting today, the men starting next week, only a week difference. So they'll basically be playing at around the same time, almost totally the opposite of the AFL.
The way the AFL seems to be handling things is the way I put together an IKEA product, Professor. I don't look at the instructions. I don't do anything sensible. I just think, how about if I put it together this way and see how it goes? It always ends in tears. I really should have thought more about it, got somebody who knows what they're talking about, and perhaps read the instructions. The NRL seems to me to be being sensible. It makes sense for the women's game to align with the men's game. They're the same clubs. They ought to play at a time of the year when it's football season or very close there too. They should be sensible in terms of not piling in 18 teams way before they're ready to have 18 teams. They should consider the financial aspect. We spoke the other day about what it's going to cost if the AFL is going to be serious about making the women's game professional. It's money that is just not going to be available, and that's why I say is going to end in tears. So I like the way the NRL's are taking a softly approach to the women's game. It seems also more respectful of the women. I suspect that they've been spoken to, their views have been taken into account, and this is what they come up with, rather than the AFL saying to Nicole Livingston, here you go, this is what you've got, this is how it's going to look, you go ahead and do it, and by the way, you take all the flack. So that's in simple terms the way I see it, Professor.
Coutta, I understand that you, in preparation for today's show, Googled NRLW.
Yeah, I thought I'd just see if we couldn't try and locate some media around the NRLW and see if we could get some background around it, like to maybe learn about the players and Fox League or Fox Sports is probably my go-to when it comes to rugby league. But unfortunately, I typed in Fox, I think it was Fox Sports NRLW, and I got NRL. I didn't get any NRLW. Maybe they're not. Maybe they've missed that there is an NRLW. I'm not sure, but I know Channel 9's doing the broadcasting, and they've got all the games on as well today at Channel 9. It's on their secondary channel into Melbourne, but they're doing a better job of broadcasting than what Channel 7 does. If you look for the AFLW on Channel 7, you may not find it. I know there's a partnership with Fox Footy, or whatever you want to call it, that they broadcast every match. But Professor, I was very surprised when I couldn't actually find anything on the Fox Sports website about the NRLW. And then obviously Paul, a gentleman that works, I think is employed by Fox Sports, has written an article about the NRLW and hasn't minced his words around it. And it reminds me a little bit of articles written about the AFLW, Judge, about how it can't fund it, it runs at a loss. The players are taking the piss, asking for equal money when they don't train as hard. He suggested that the DY Grade 1 team train just as hard, so they probably should get a pay rise as well. So the article was really around the women asking for equal pays, a bit of a joke considering the league runs at a loss. But I think we've seen with other sports, so we can talk about the Big Bash and we can talk about, I still think AFLW is heading somewhat in the right direction, that NRLW is following the same path. Like, it's amazing the way that everyone tries to recreate the wheel and that, and then they're critical about it. But I bet you in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, when other clubs join the league and the competition gains traction, guess what he'll be writing? What a glorious day for rugby league and sport it is.
What else did Andrew Bolt have to say in that article?
And Andrew Bolt. I think we might be talking about Paul Kent.
Sorry, got it wrong.
Paul Kent, who works on a show on Fox League called NRL 360 with Buzz Lightyear. I just see that Braithen Astor's been announced as the host of that particular show, Paul. So
I was going to say about Paul Kent, he could win Powerball and complain about the prize pools, you know. So he'd have a crack at anything, that bloke. He's not the most positive bloke in the game, I can tell you. So I'm disappointed about that. When I'm not saying, I think we made a very good point last week about the women's AFL. There's never a negative comment. They could miss from 5 metres out right in front and they'd say something positive somehow. There's no constructive criticism. I don't mind constructive criticism, but when this competition is at its formative stages and to get up on the top rope and say it's destined to failure, I don't think the game needs that. And there's got to be something positive in what I've discussed today. These growth areas of Australia and the growth areas of rugby league, you've got to get behind the teams and support them.
Well, I'm coming up with a strategy around the AFLW and how that will be successful. And I think it will be a pathway for other sports to follow.
You could end up on a retainer like a Peter V'landers basis, dare I say?
Well, what we'll talk about is we'll talk about Tennis Australia later, and we'll have a bit of a laugh at their expense. But what I've looked at, and this will come up later in another show, is around the correlation between the sports and how you get the best traction. Like the Big Bash, the WBBL, is the standard of that has gone to another level this year, and that includes the crowds. One thing, and this is something, Paul, that I think the NRL does better than what other sports do, and I might be a bit premature there, is they actually take the sport to the regional centres.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And we're watching the game against Newcastle today. They'll get a pretty good crowd today because Newcastle love their rugby league.
Yep.
and they love the opportunity to go to it. Now, last night, and we will cover it, obviously they played the Charity Shield in the great town of Mudgee. They've played other matches in territories. I think the AFL practice matches judge, they took 1 to, and if you haven't had a chance to see it, Lavington. Now, you should see the facilities at Lavington. Why?
I actually played there, Coutta. Yep.
But Judge, they've built a new grandstand, and I don't understand why they don't take cricket, the Big Bash. They don't take the international series to centres like that, because guess what? They'll get a crowd and they'll probably get some TV.
Coutta, there is no place in Australia that loves football more than Albury, Lavington. Lavington's on the other side of the Murray to Albury. Albury's probably the best country football club in Australia, has been for many years, and they get massive crowds up there. And absolutely right. The AFL, this magnificent organisation supposed to represent Australian football, is so centric to its 18 teams. Just doesn't think about what's out there in the country. There are fantastic facilities. Well, people love the game in the country.
Well, I hope the Judge was able to attend the Collingwood Hawthorn 6-quarter match. I'm not sure how you get 6 quarters, but the 6-period match that was played down at Morwell on Friday, Professor, you would have been there, wouldn't you?
No, Coutta, I had other things I had to do, unfortunately. But, yeah, an interesting concept, 6 quarters. 6 quarters.
So, but I think, though, that if we look at it, though, and this is the beauty of rugby league, is that their crowds aren't the end or be all of the competition. So if it's 8,000, if it's 10,000 at a regional centre, they probably get more eyeballs on the TV, Paul, and that's where they get their money from.
Well, that Charity Shield at Mudgee, I was half expecting Banjo Patterson to jump out of his grave and tell a few poems. There was that many people packed into that crowd, and it was great for the town of Mudgee, which is a fine spot, and they loved the match, and it was amazing.
And therefore, Judge, on the back of all this, you've got the NRLW today that's on the back of the practice matches, the Charity Shield last night, the practice matches. You've got a whole weekend of rugby league and a celebration of the sport.
Yep.
Whereas today, I don't know the coverage. I suspect that the AFL will have one match on Channel 7 today, I would think. And then the rest of it will be on, I'm just checking, Judge, because AFLW has one match, and I think, Professor, there's 3 matches today.
I think there's 4 today, Coutta.
Oh, it's a catch-up match, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there's 4 today.
So
you can only watch 3 on pay TV.
Correct. So there's a difference immediately, Judge. We know it. We expect it from Channel 7 and the AFL. And what a free hit for sport, people that want to watch sport, for the NRL and the NRLW today.
I'm waiting for the Coutta AFLW memorandum of, I presume you're looking at a 10-year plan or something like that, Coutta? I'm looking forward to it.
Well, no 10-year plan, because I think 10-year plans are ridiculous in any business.
AFL's just done one.
Well, the AFL does. Yeah. So, but no, it's amazing when you start looking at it and how the AFL, and if you haven't read it, and I know Professor has, there's a Melbourne player called Libby Birch who is starting to establish a career through the media, and she's doing some articles on AFLW. She's the one that talked about the AFLW playing at the MCG, full-time footballers, and she's now started talking about it's time for a full season. It's time to play the season with the men. Now, I think she doesn't care what, as in if she gets censored or anything like that. But I think at the end of the day, what she's written should be resonating with most of the sport and the governance of the sport as well.
Phil Mickelson.
Professor, I'm saying the Coutta manifesto will be better than the AFLW BS bingo. which we got the other day from their so-called 10-year plan.
Yeah, I'm sure, Judge. Just on how NRL are treating the women's game and how AFL are treating the women's game, Paul, we were just saying that the NRL structured this round so that its practice matches wouldn't affect the women's games and they'd have their own clear air. I just went forward, Judge, and had a look at next week's round of practice matches. There's a full slate over the weekend, including Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Bad luck, AFLW, you're not going to get any clear air next week. Now, given it's just practice matches, why is the AFL fixated on getting the men at the prime times when it's specifically going to affect their other product?
We don't need to ask the question why they're fixated. We know they're fixated. The question is, how is that going to change? And it's just not. When the women's game competes time-wise, eyeball-wise, with even the pre-season of the AFL, which at the moment is going to take precedence with the media. The AFL's wrong. The media's wrong. We've been banging on about it for that long, but I can't see it changing until they get the scheduling right.
All right, Paul, Charity Shield.
Oh, brilliant try.
Give us your thoughts on that game last night.
It was great for the town of Mudgee. It is more than a trial match. The Rabbitohs have won the last 10, so I actually don't mind that the Dragons won it, but more importantly that they're looking like a team that's found itself. You don't want to see any basket cases in any sport if you love the sport itself. So the Dragons look very good. There's some very interesting talent there. Tyrell Sloan is a superstar in the backs and Cody Ramsey as well. That very, very impressive. And our Dragons listeners would be really enjoyed that match. I love from a Rabbitohs perspective that the replacement for Adam Reynolds, Lachlan Ilias, that's part of the reason we didn't offer him the 3-year or even a 2-year deal that he wanted, is to hang on to these young kids that were coming through. One of whom played in last year's grand final, Blake Taft at the back. He played very well. Lachlan Ilias showed some moments as well that he's going to be a great player. What we were going to miss the most about Adam Reynolds was his kicking game, and it looks like this Lachlan Ilias has got it together. So I think the Dragons are on the rise, and it was very impressive to watch as a game. And it was a close match, and it was really good to see that the Dragons broke that 10-year hoodoo, because I don't think a 10-year run of wins is good in any sport when there's just the two teams playing. So I think it's good for rugby league. It was a very good quality match. How much each team was putting in could be seen. It wasn't just a trial, and it was great for the game and also the town of Mudgee, as we talked about earlier.
For the Rabbitohs fans, Paul, was there anything you saw that impressed you?
Well, I like that half. That's our biggest hole is Adam Reynolds, and I think you can see how much excitement there is in Brisbane, what a big loss he is to the Rabbits. He's turned a basket case in the Broncos into a team that people are quite excited about already. So he's already their captain up there. So what we need is someone to step in. Cameron Murray is our captain. I've talked about him for a long time. He'll play for Australia one day, a very impressive young man. He's already going places, and just the level head that the Rabbitohs need. I think that we need to make sure that Latrell Mitchell doesn't have his brain explosions. There's been a lot of talk about that this week. He's coming back in a couple of weeks' time. He'll be playing in round 2, Professor against the Storm and panel, if anyone wants to join me. It's on a Thursday night. Be nice to sneak down there after work to get to Storm and Rabbits, and that will be Latrell's return. So let's hope he doesn't try to take someone's head off this time.
Did I see a correct quote from Latrell during the week, Paul, that said, I don't have to change, the game has to change?
Oh, he doesn't want to change his style. He turned his mate into Phantom of the Opera, so I don't, with one elbow, so I don't know whether he's going to apologise for that. I think he thinks it's part of his game, but you can't be breaking bones in people's faces and thinking that's acceptable. That was a pretty vicious act. If you did that on the street, you'd probably go to the big house. So I think he needs to stop belting blokes in the head. I'm all for aggression, but belting blokes in the face, and it's got to go. It's got to go. So he did make comments. I didn't see that extreme a comment. What I saw was that he doesn't want to change his game style. Well, yeah, you've got to stop doing that, or you'll spend a lot of time on the sidelines.
the comment around not changing his game style, it's sort of, I think, caught the publicity, or caught, it was one of those clickbait sort of things. But he can't afford not to be out on the ground for South Sydney, Paul, at the end of the day. He is one of the best players in the competition when he's on. And I say when he's on because when he's off, he is horrible. He's just one of those players that just, I think everything has to be right for Latrell. But when he's playing, he's one of the best players in the competition. And you don't want to compare him against players, but he has that real Greg Inglis sort of long stride that opens up defences and then bring other players into the game. So he may have to change part of his game, but at the end of the day, I think the running and everything like that, and he's probably referenced to the aggression just needs to be toned down a little bit or directed in the right way.
I was going to say, your sport that you love, John McEnroe used to fire himself up. Not that he was genuinely annoyed by a line call or whatever. He played his best fired up. When he lashed out, a vase got smashed. It wasn't a bloke's cheek, So it's a big. He wasn't walking across the net and smashing a bloke in the face with a racket. So I'm all for aggression, and Leighton Hewitt as well. Pretty quiet-natured guy, but he'd play best when he was pumped up. I'm all for being pumped up, but when your mates are having their faces rearranged, you do have to change your game.
And obviously with the trial games, Paul, we've got the Storm playing in Ballarat today. Last week, they had their trial match at Casey against the Warriors. But have you seen anything to indicate that obviously I should start by saying yesterday that can you win a premiership if you lose a trial match by 36 points to nothing?
Oh, you can. I mean, the Rabbitohs lost a game by, I think, 40 points or something last year. And I remember reading at the time stats, you never win a premiership. Well, we didn't win it, but we came pretty close. I wouldn't take too much notice of the trial form at all. What I would say about who's looking very impressive, and I don't want to give that away yet, but I think Manly are going to have a very good season. My word, they've got some firepower all over the place and a structured team. Desi Hasler's got them singing. So I think Manly, without giving it away, will be right up there in my reckoning. And that's from trial form. I think if you go bad in a trial, it's more forgivable. But when you look that good in a trial, there's something that's happening there that's hard to fake in rugby league.
All right, Paul. Well, thanks for your thoughts on the NRLW season and how that'll pan out. The big one we're waiting for next week will be your much awaited NRL preview of the season and your thoughts on where the final ladder will be. Maybe Kevin Yap will be interested in to see how you put the Dragons there.
He might be a bit happier this year after, I think I got it right though, Kevy. I think I got 7 out of 8 on the top 8 from memory, Professor. So I left them out and they certainly didn't make it in last time I checked. So Kevy can wait until they make the 8 before he gets up on his high horse this year.
All right, Coutta, we might go to you with some tennis. There was some articles written about what feels like the long-time finished Oz Open, and probably what prompted that was Novak Djokovic losing a quarterfinal to a qualifier in the Dubai tennis match. He said he was humiliated by what happened in Australia. I don't know that there are too many other people who feel humiliated. There hasn't been much of a, evening up after things that happened there.
Well, the humiliation was the Australian public at the end of the day, wasn't it? And the Australian tennis fans. Coming into a tournament, the Grand Slam, that should be the promotion of tennis within this great country of ours. And the lead up was all about Novak and how he was going to get into Australia and all that, whereas it should have been a normal build up to a Grand Slam, excitement building. Now, the articles this week, Professor, and the ones you're referring to, is that Tennis Australia thought that they needed, and we've spoken about before, thought that they needed Djokovic to have a tournament and to headline a tournament. Now, Novak's been treated like a king by Tiley and his entourage, like everything he's wanted, he's always got. At the back end of the tournament, Barty, Nadal, Kyrgios, Kokkinakis have made the Australian Open this year one of the more memorable tournaments in years. They've saved Australian tennis. They've saved Tennis Australia from the embarrassment of Djokovic, and I should mention Nadal and also Medvedev. Sorry, but at the end of the tournament, there was a celebration around how good it was. The crowds were back, etc. So we're now a month on from the final. We haven't seen anything about the debrief that Craig Tiley said there would be. There'd be a debrief about the tournament, not around Djokovic or around the conduct of himself, the board, including Jane Herdlicker. And really, I think what that does, and this might sound harsh, is I think that sums up tennis in Australia, to be honest. It's a once-a-year sort of event. We don't hear much outside of it unless it's Kyrgios hitting balls at people or carrying on, doing underarm serves or the like. We certainly don't hear anything about tennis outside of the Australian Open, and it seems this way that Tiley and the board have just been let loose or got off with the conduct that they undertook.
Judge, would you agree with that comment that tennis only?
Absolutely. Coota and I don't always agree on anything relating to tennis, but couldn't agree more. Tennis Australia should rename itself Tennis Australian Open. That's all they care about. That's their fortnight of care. As long as that went well, Tiley's covered, Herdlicker's covered, and they forget that their job is to look after tennis for Australia, and they don't. And I think it's getting worse, and that's reflected by the dearth of players in the country, suburbs, just generally. There's that in itself should lead to Tiley's sacking and Herdlicker's sacking, and probably the rest of an obviously compliant board. But I think the Djokovic thing was just the cream of the cake to say, you guys have got no idea, and they should fall on his sword. And if they don't fall on his sword, they should be sacked. Having said that, nothing will happen. Sport is run by idiots. Tennis is clearly in that same boat, as is cricket and other sports. But no, I agree with Coota, Professor.
Judge, just on a side note, if you read the annual report for Tennis Australia,
most popular sport in Australia?
No, I'm not sure it says that, but it's. I don't think I've ever read an annual report that's got as much chest beating as what, or patting on the back, I should say, as what the annual report does. Now, the judges sort of talked about the Tennis Australia board. So 6 officials are elected by the state authorities. So I reckon we're missing, there should be more than 6, I would have thought, because I think there's more than 6 states, but anyway, I could be wrong. And then those 6 board members then elect 3 other directors. So there's 9 directors on the board of Tennis Australia. Now, as we know, Jane Herdlicker is the chairperson of Tennis Australia and has been since 2017. And her second term as president ends this week, I believe. The rest of them have been there since 2015, 2016, and then there were 2 others that were elected in 2019, Judge. So they've got terms of 3 years by the looks. But what surprised me was that there's 3 people on the board with connections directly with Virgin Australia.
Oh, dear.
Now Jane is the CEO of Tennis Australia. The Chief Marketing Officer of Virgin Australia is a board member as well. So she would be employed by Jane, wouldn't she?
Yeah, that sounds a bit too close for comfort.
And then Graham Bradley from 2016 has been a board member as well, and he was a director of Virgin Australia Holdings International. Now, I'm not sure whether that entity exists anymore after the Virgin sale restructure. But again, like I would think that the success or the lack of success at Virgin, I thought it was strange that you'd have that many people from the one organisation or with that background are involved in one organisation from a governance perspective.
At least they're saving on flights to get to the board meetings, unless they're doing them by Zoom, I guess.
Are there any tennis players on the board?
They've got interest in tennis, these people. So they've got, one of them has been the president of Tennis Australia, Tennis ACT, sorry. One of them was a board member of Tennis West. I was the president of Tennis West, which I assume is Western Australian Tennis. Jane's got a couple of daughters that were keen tennis players, and she's a tennis player as well. Mark De Silva's a lawyer out of Melbourne who was the president of St Andrews Gardner in just off. There's a little tennis club. You might see it on the Waverley train line on the right-hand side as you get to Gardner train station. Now, Gardner's not a suburb, I don't think. I could be wrong. And he was also the president of the Bayside Regional Tennis Association. But if you remember back to 2016, the board resignations at the Australian Open of Janet, I think it was Janet Young and Karen Pratt, was just at the Australian Open in 2016. Now the last sort of tennis players that were directors of Tennis Australia, Judge.
Okay.
Now,
Scotty Draper was there somewhere, wasn't he?
No, Scott's has been involved in high performance coaching and the like, but never as a board or director on the Tennis Australia board. So we've talked about the fact that you don't have to have been a tennis player, but based on those 9 people, are they in the best position to be able to comment on tennis within Australia?
Thanks for that, Coutta. Let's go to another topic. We know about the conflict in Ukraine at the moment, and I see that the Champions League final has been removed from being played in Russia. The Russian Grand Prix has also been removed. Aside from those things, do you think that there's any other way that sport can help in the current conflict by using its initiatives to put pressure on the Russians?
Professor, you'll also comment about Formula One Grand Prix was removed. There's a driver, Mazepin, who drives for the Haas team. Now, to get a seat in Formula One, either you're a good driver or you need to bring a sponsor with you. I don't think he's a good driver, but he's brought a Russian sponsor with him to the Haas team. Now, the cars had the red, white and blue of Russia on the cars. Overnight, those colours have been removed. He also didn't speak at a press conference, and they're working through whether or not he continues in his role as a driver at Haas. It's just amazing that the way that the whole world's reacting to it from a sporting perspective, and tennis as well. Professor's another one. So Davis Cup as well, things like that.
Well, Abramovich has had to give up Chelsea, I saw, but it puts it all a bit in perspective. You had a woman with a bandage who's just been hit by a missile, and then the big news, though, is whether Sebastian Vettel wants to drive a car around in loops around a circuit. You know, it really does seem academic whether or not a car goes round in circle when you've got a woman who's been blinded by a missile. But I guess all that the sports can do is ensure that they don't support what's going on. And if Sebastian Vettel wants to get up there and say, I don't want a part of it and I condemn it, as a high-profile individual, that is better than nothing. But I wouldn't mind knowing if that woman's going to regain her sight or not, rather than whether he's going to go round in loops in a fast car. But I guess we are a sports show, aren't we?
Well, I'll just take you up on that Abramovich. He hasn't given the club up. The reports I first saw in BBC this morning was that he'd given the club away. It's a cynical move. Well, what he's actually done is he's handed over day-to-day control to the charity which they run. He's retained his financial interest in Chelsea, and as sure as X, as soon as this thing all dies down, he'll take back the control. Abramovich, by the way, was when Putin came to power, Abramovich was the guy who interviewed all of his cabinet members. This guy is clearly associated with the Russian oligarchs and leaders, It's a thing in Russia, they say you never ask an oligarch where he got his first million from. It's never pretty. And you look at how he got his first billions. It's just outrageous. But that's the sort of people who we're dealing with. I think, Professor, this is very serious. The only worldwide movement I can remember that was actually effective when sport got involved was the apartheid movement back in the 70s and 80s, when that had a fair bit to do with the blacks getting some sort of equality in South Africa. What Putin has done, I can't think of much more outrageous conduct since the Second World War of a country's leader. He says that Ukraine are his country, they're his people, that they belong to Russia. Look what he's doing to his people. I saw them this morning. They can't get out of the place quick enough. He can't kill them more quickly. This, to me, is as bad as it gets. And I think if sport is serious about this, Russia should be made an absolute pariah throughout the world of every sport you can imagine, including, well, imagine a sport, and just say to Russia, you can't compete. Now, the problem with sanctions, it sounds good, but every sanction doesn't just hurt the country they're targeted against, it also hurts the country that's making the sanctions. At some point, we, the sanctioners, have to stand up and say, we'll put up with high petrol prices, we'll put up with sports events not taking place if we are fair dinkum about harming Putin and his merry men, and they'll all be men. So I think this is actually a bit of a put up or shut up moment for sport, and be very interesting to see, other than just periphery, whether sport takes some serious action against Russia.
Judge, good to see the IOC being loud and coming out.
Haven't heard that, Professor. What have they said?
Nothing. Nothing.
Oh, nothing. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, should I say typical? They're very good at little things, like saying that Russian skater should have been better treated. That just casts the IOC in a good light. But when it comes to serious sanctions, how the hell Russia is competing? One day I'll have come in for the long run on Russia's doping and other crimes against sport, Professor, and they should not be competing under any umbrella, including the Russian Olympic Committee.
It's one of the great jokes, isn't it? Like,
it's fantastic.
Who's ROC? Oh, the Russian Olympic Committee. Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, Professor, I would have thought we would have heard from Dick Pound or one of our good mates, the mate of the show, John Coates, or Kevan with an A might have just sort of stepped up to the plate as well, being the great leaders of sport that they are.
Yeah.
Maybe Peter V'landys could step in and speak on their behalf.
Oh, I'm not sure we would want Peter talking about this, but he might have some very strong views about it, Paul.
I was going to say, Judge, with Abramovich and Putin, they've each got more puppets than Jim Henson ever pumped out, so I don't think it's really going to really harm them, is it, you know?
Well, and isn't it great that organisations like the Olympic Committee and also the United Nations, I think the United Nations has made a resolution that they don't agree with what Putin's done. I mean, it's serious. This is who does the poor Ukrainians turn to? And look, sport can only do so much, Professor, but we know that the Russians are very proud of their sport and the Winter Olympics and everything else, but there has to be some serious pain.
We do have ScoMo telling him to back off, so I'm surprised that didn't work.
I think he's otherwise going to shirt front him.
Spray him with a hose.
All right, gentlemen, we might finish on this one today. There was some publicity during the week. Poor old Phil Mickelson got his fingers jammed in the door, decided that he would say some good words on behalf of a new Saudi breakaway golf championship to rival the PGA, and all the cards came tumbling down, and Phil's decided to take a break from the sport to rethink his position. Judge, how did you see that developing?
It wasn't a bad week for him. He happened to offend everybody. he offended the PGA. He offended the LIV, which is this organisation that's getting to bear with the Saudis. An article turned up when he spoke or misspoke in November, where he called them a murderous regime who killed Adnan Khashoggi, which of course they did, and horrible to women and horrible to gays. And you wouldn't want to get to bear with them. But having said that, yeah, I will join it because the PGA is a horrible bunch of people who are depriving people of money, namely himself, and he feels that they're horrible. And then he gives the 21st century apology, which we're all starting to see now very frequently. I don't know if you know the 21st century apology. He says he's taken out of context. He was off the record. I'm not actually sorry. I've been misquoted. I want to spend more time with the family. Having problems with mental health, and I don't think my words reflect who I am. That's a 21st century apology, and that's what he's given. And if you know the real Phil Mickelson, apart from Goofy Phil, I don't think he's a very nice person. And all Phil Mickelson cares about is Phil Mickelson and a bucket of money. And so, of course, he's up with Greg Norman, who also, or should I call him his awesomeness, as he refers to himself. I think Greg Norman's rather concerned about Greg Norman and a bucket of money. So they're good bedfellows. This thing has got mud written all over it, but make no mistake, it'll come back. The Saudis have got more money to poke a stick at. The players are inherently selfish, because that's what golf is. This thing will come back, and we're talking about this for the next few years, I think, Professor.
It's very similar to what happens in sport and also our profession, where someone will say, this firm is chasing me for this amount of dollars, when they're not interested in going to that firm and simply using it as, I've been taught, the gun to the head approach, that unless you pay me this, I'll go there. Happens in rugby league as well, where players are saying, well, I'm going to go there unless you match their offer. If they're not sincere on going there, then it is pretty low. But if someone's chasing them for a certain amount and I want you to match it, well, you get the choice to match it. But if he actually used the word leverage, which has annoyed people, he didn't genuinely want to be a part of this tour. He just wanted more money from his current employer, which no one likes as a manager or an employer, truly.
Yeah, it's a good point you raised, Paul. But the interesting part as well out of all this, of course, is the great Australian Greg Norman. Well, he's Australian probably when he wants to be judge. It's the first time I've seen him with a shirt on for a long time as well. He seems to enjoy just having his rig out, but he's a director of the Saudi Arabian government's business, as you mentioned before, LIV Golf Investments, and he's got a $2.9 billion war chest to create this tour, and Phil was going to be obviously the starring person in that. It reminded me a little bit of the Rebel Tour of South Africa back in the day, with the Cricket Australia saying that they wouldn't be able to represent Australia or play cricket for Australia again. The PGA Tour obviously, and through their chairperson, came out and said that they'd be banned from playing on the PGA Tour, and the Sharks doubled down on that. But Phil Mickelson...
Just by the way, Coutta, to show what an idiot he is, he can't take an action on behalf of the players. He's saying that LIV is going to sue the PGA on behalf of the players who they don't represent. I mean, what la land is it when you can take an action against something that has no effect on you whatsoever? But keep going.
Tops off would get away with it, I think. But Phil will feel this. Like, I know he's made millions of dollars, and he's the PGA Tour fund that all the players are part of. He's set for life. But when you lose sponsors KPMG, Amstel Beer, Callaway and Workday, that's a fair hit. No doubt there'll be people that come on the back of it, but would you really want your brand to be associated with Phil once he made those comments? And these were the comments. We know they killed, as you said, Khashoggi, and have a terrible record on human rights. They execute people over there for being gay. Knowing all this, here you go, Paul, you'll love this. Knowing all this, why would I even consider it? because this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to reshape how the PGA Tour operates.
A massive punch as well. He allegedly changed golf clubs just before a Ryder Cup to pay off a massive multi-million-dollar gambling debt, allegedly. So it is all just about the dollars to Phil.
But Coutta, do you think the players, when it comes down to it, they say they play in Saudi Arabia because they're trying to grow the game in that country, BS. They say, we're not politicians, we shouldn't give comments. I think that's actually BS because they know what's going on. It is a horrible regime. Not only do they treat the gays the way they do, they won't let women drive. They persecute women. They will execute women. So I don't know if any woman will ever play in that country. But do you seriously think that the players, if the money was there, won't seriously entertain it?
No. I think there's something around. I think it's the top 150 on the US tour are all earn $1 million a year. Top 150, which is just staggering in its own right. You compare that to tennis and the equality is totally different. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's 2.9 billion, Judge. And if that wasn't offered, do you really think? And let's be honest, how's Phil reshaping the PGA Tour by playing in Saudi Arabia? What's that got to do with what happens in the PGA? Are they upset with the PGA Tour? Are they like? The PGA Tour, most weekends, you do not know who's necessarily going to win. You've moved on from the next era, like Tiger, probably Phil to a certain extent. You've had Bryson DeChambeau come through. He shook up golf a little bit. You got the Australian with the mullet, Cameron Smith, who's in the top 10 in the world. You got Jordan Spieth. So you've got a whole different generation coming through. And then on the back end of this, last weekend in Australia, Hannah Green won a tournament that the men played as well. Now, it's the first time in the world where a female has won a tournament, a co-sanctioned tournament. And that was actually held at the home of golf at Cobram Barooga on the border of the Murray. Now, that's what should be getting the publicity, that she won that tournament and beat the Australians. But instead, here we are talking about Phil Mickelson and the PGA Tour that's got millions and millions of dollars behind it and makes people millionaires. Coutta,
the LPGA has just got a new CEO and all I've read about her is pretty impressive. Let me make a prediction. She'll get involved in this. She will say to the PGA, we are not going to that murderous, misogynistic country with Greg Norman, with the Saudis. And if you guys go, we're not going to go with you and we're going to talk this up. And I think the men will back off. I think the women's game will become more and more vocal about these sorts of issues. They haven't been in the past, but I think that they're starting to get their voice. And I think you'll find the women's part of the game will have a role in this. We'll just see what happens.
All right. Thanks for that, gentlemen. The gelding couldn't be with us today because he's headed off to Ballarat to watch his horse that he's got an interest in drop the mic in race 6. He says the trainer's very upbeat on it, but I don't think the gelding's as upbeat when I was talking to him yesterday. His tips for today: race 2, horse 9, Sumatra. Damien Oliver riding for the Blue Army on a favourite. Race 3, horse 8, Devouring, being piloted by Declan Bates from the Freedman stable. And race 4, horse 9, Stromboli, with John McNeil aboard, being ridden for the Hawks. So,
Professor, can we just go back? You emphasised Damien Oliver riding a favourite. Is there a reason for your emphasis on that, or was it just a matter of fact?
Just a matter of fact, Coutta.
Okay.
We deal with facts. We deal with facts on this program.
Professor, talking about facts, the Zinger count today for Paul was only a 10. He had 8 to half time and absolutely dropped off after that. I think because we sort of done that a little bit, but it's just not good enough, I don't think.
I was going to say, Gelding's horse is $10 if he salutes with that. He'll drop more than a mic, I reckon. He'll drop quite a few pots, I reckon.
11.
And those around him.
And the game at the moment, Paul, 8-0 in favour of the Dragons has been I would say, a fairly good standard today.
It's been good, but they'll get tired. There's half an hour to go, so I think the Titans might finish off. So don't just remember the Titans for me if you can.
All right, Paul.
There you go. Add that one on, will you?
You just have to get that last one in before we finished. All right, gentlemen. Thanks for the day, and until next